Alright, so, obviously the library was closed today because of Labor Day, I guess. Not sure why I didn't look into that before. Um, alright. Chapter 1, overview, the Dearth. Most of this book is a small speculation and a provocation. It is mostly about the future, but is based on facts of the past and present. Of course, no one ever knows how the future will turn out, but the facts discussed here are not only quite remarkable, but also seem to me to have an extraordinary amount of productive power. I believe that these facts are so potent and so different from what has come to be before that they can frame and shape much of what is yet to come. In doing so, they lay out the terrain of the playing field upon which we can act to mold and to try and change our destiny. Ooh. Let me begin with an unscientific but instructive piece of evidence. In 1985, as I was beginning this book, I gave a speech in Linden, Michigan, to an assembly of several hundred high school students. Linden is a small community, which is more or less a suburb of Flint. These young Lindeners were not precisely a typical group of young Americans. They're pretty close, middle class, disproportionately white, of course. Fresh-faced, fun, alert, perhaps a little less educated than ought to be. Oh, disclaimer, by the way, this book is pretty racist, unfortunately, but of course, that's history, you gotta teach it. And yeah, it's also mixed with homophobia, and... Okay, by the way, I misspoke when, reading or showing the pages. I said that it was positive towards immigrants. The reason I said that is because throughout this one time in this book, as he was talking about conservative fears about immigrants taking over and yada yada, he says that no, actually, in fact, immigrants don't steal our jobs and they don't corrupt society in that way. So that had me feeling totally like, all right, that's pretty good framing compared to what people usually say about immigrants, you know? All right. Anyways, a part of my talk dealt with demographics. I tried to fill the youngsters in on where they fit in the demographic scheme of things. I mentioned the fact that the United States had a baby boom that went on for almost 20 years following World War II. I noted further that the median age of the students in the auditorium was currently about 17, and that they were typically born in 1968. I explained that their mothers typically had born them somewhat after the baby boom had ended, although at the time when birth rates were much higher than the rates that now prevail. As a matter of demographic fact, at a time I spoke to these 17-year-olds, their mothers would most typically have been in their early 40s. For all intents and purposes, the cohort of American women into those mothers would fall had already completed their childbearing years, and their total fertility had measured by the Census Bureau at 2.4 children per woman. That rate is derived by adding up how many children were born to the woman in that cohort and divided by the total number of women in that cohort. In terms of child distribution per woman, it works out this way for the age group of the mothers of those young Lindeners. All right, so children. Okay, so 12% wanted 0 kids, and another 12 of the kids was 1%. 34% of wanted 2 kids. 24 wanted 3 kids. Did I say 34 wanted 2 kids? That's what I meant, I think. Okay, yeah, 24 wanted 3, and 19 wanted 4 or more kids. Ooh, gross. Anyways, these numbers, when graphed, are presented by the chart on page 3. Having set the historical demographic background, I decided to conduct some of the spot survey research. I began by asking the students some questions about their family demographic history, how many siblings they had, and so on, and they told them that I was not interested in primarily in the past, and not interested primarily in their mother's fertility patterns. I really wanted to know about their own future fertility. Yeah. I told them to get ready for the show of hands regarding how many children they wanted to have. As might be imagined, the boys and girls began giggling and chattering, joking and poking. I asked, "How many want to have 4 or more children?" Not one hand went up. Thankfully. Who the freaking hell wants 4 kids? Jesus. I then asked, how many wanted to have 3 children? A smattering of hands, call it about a tenth of the students. Groans came from the seated neighbors of the hand raisers. Quote, "Sally, you're going to have 3 children? Gross." Okay. I asked, 2 children? Suddenly, a sea of hands in the auditorium and about half the group. 1 children? Almost a third of the hands went up, approximately 30%. And no children at all? A smattering again, perhaps a tenth. These rough numbers look like this. 0 children, 10%. 30%, 1 children. 50%, 2 children. 10%, 3 children. 0%, 4 or more. The fertility projected from that data would be very different from the 2.4 children completed fertility rate born to their mother's generation. The arithmetic for the young students works out to 1.6 children per woman. A second row of bars on page 5 added to the earlier chart depicts the future desires of Linden teenagers compared to what had already happened in America at large in an earlier generation. Let us think for a moment about these data. One set precise, one set admittedly very rough, in order merely to keep a population stable over an extended period of time. It takes 2.1 children per woman, excluding immigrants. The generation of the mothers of Linden High School students, typically bearing most of their children after the baby boom was over, average about 2.4 children per woman. That 2.4 figure continued over the time when would yield a vigorously growing United States. But these youngsters in the informal poll were saying that they intended to bear only 1.6 children. The mothers had 50% more children than the teenagers expected to have. If continued over the period of time, that 1.6 rate yields first a low population growth rate for America. Then it yields a no growth rate. Ultimately, it yields a United States of America that is shrinking.